Hi, I'm Rebecca at the Dry Eye Foundation, and this is the second video in my series called 20 Years of Dry Eye. Ocular surface disease, ocular surface pain. What do these things mean, and why might they matter to dry eye patients and their doctors? Today, I want to invite you into a place of curiosity and learning about the patient community's shared experiences. I'm going to ask you to think really differently about this thing we call dry eye and look at it through a different lens and in a fresh new way. Before we get started, here's a quick recap of video number 1 for those who missed it. I'm Rebecca, and I've been doing patient advocacy in the dry eye space for more than 20 years. In that time, there's been a ton of research on dry eye. In the last 7 years alone, 8,000 studies were published. 8,000! There's been more and more education for doctors and for patients about dry eye, and dry eye treatments and remedies have grown into a $4 billion industry. Yet, many patients continue to struggle in exactly the same ways that they did before most of this happened. In fact, way too many symptomatic dry eye disease patients are struggling way too much for way too long before getting anything resembling effective help, support, and education. I've watched this trend continue largely unabated in spite of all that research and all the industry growth and all the treatment options. And today, it's time to talk about why and what to do differently. What really lies at the heart of persistent dry eye disease patient dissatisfaction, if I can put it that way? What kind of paradigm change is it going to take to make things better for patients? I'm really excited to share with you my thoughts about this today. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about modern dry eye and how it got that way. Once upon a time, and for most of human history, there was a thing called dry eye. It meant pretty much exactly what it says. Dry eye. If you had dry eye, you couldn't make tears, or at least not enough for your eyes to be healthy and for you to see comfortably. The main reason for this was that the body parts responsible for making tears, called the lacrimal glands, were somehow impaired. This dry eye thing lived for the most part in a nice neat box, meaning it was a specific thing with a reasonably clear meaning. And that box was pretty small, as in not very many people fit in the box. Historically, if you were in the box, if you had this thing called dry eye, your eyes probably felt very uncomfortable. You probably experienced many of the things in the pink bucket: burning, grittiness, stinging, maybe pain. And in the centuries and millennia before medical treatments, your lack of a protective tear layer could leave your eyes vulnerable to sight-threatening infectious diseases. This was dry eye as known by mankind. Then along came a new thing called modern life, at least the last 40 or 50 years of it. It came with many changes. For example, many of us started living and working in well-sealed, climate-controlled buildings. We started eating lots of highly processed foods. We started wearing contact lenses. We started using lots of medications. We started staring at computers all day, and eventually we started staring at our phones the rest of the time. And we started getting more autoimmune diseases. And we started getting elective surgeries to our eyes and our eyelids. As time went on, many of us started noticing our eyes a lot. Our eyes started getting really uncomfortable. We experienced this in all different ways, but basically our experiences included that same pink bucket of symptoms as those people in the small box with dry eye. Our symptoms were so persistent that they started affecting our lives, our work, driving, sleep, social activities, ordinary daily life, in a really noticeable way. And we decided this was a problem. So we went to the eye doctor. We told them all about our problem and how much it was affecting us. And when the doctor examined our eyes, they didn't see anything dramatically wrong that could explain how badly our eyes felt. So hang on, how does that work? I mean, I go to the doctor knowing I have a problem. And all the things I'm telling the doctor sound just like what people with dry eye experience. But remember, dry eye lives in a small box, and we don't fit the profile. You couldn't fit us in that dry eye box even with a shoehorn. Remember those lacrimal glands that make tears? Ours are actually pretty happy. So we have a real problem, but apparently we do not have a dry eye problem. Over time, more and more of us had these issues, these buckets of eye symptoms. And when there were enough of us talking to our eye doctors about our buckets of symptoms, and then when there were enough eye doctors noticing that their patients had a problem that sounded like dry eye but wasn't, then it was time for science and industry to grapple with the problem. So, science to the rescue. Over the next 30 years or so, science worked really hard. They studied our tears a lot. And as an essential part of that research, and this is something you can think of as kind of both the chicken and the egg, they also grappled with that small box definition of dry eye. They began to make the box bigger by redefining what dry eye means. And 3, thankfully, some scientists also eventually began studying nerves and pain. Next, we're going to zoom in on number 2 and look at how the scientific meaning of dry eye evolved. The original small box definition of dry eye, where I don't make tears, over time morphed into a big bucket definition of dry eye, where my tears, or my tear film as we call it, just wasn't good enough. And as you might imagine, there's a lot more people with less than perfect tears than there are people with no tears. Now, we're going to lift the lid for a moment on that process of evolution. In the last 30 years, 3 major new dry eye disease definitions were published. First, the National Eye Institute, then twice the Tear Film and Ocular Surface Society's International Dry Eye Workshops. I compared these definitions, and I've listed here just the changes because I found it really interesting. What was added, what was modified, what was replaced, and so on. And if you geek out on stuff like this, like me, go ahead and pause the video so you can look up the definitions, but I really didn't want to bore everybody else. So I'm just going to highlight 2 things. First, obviously, the definition of dry eye grew and ultimately became far more inclusive. Second, by 2007 at the latest, there was no rational reason left to keep calling this thing dry eye. The intuitive, literal meaning of the words dry eye no longer matched the definition, period. This thing was not and is not dry eye. This was recognized as a problem a long time ago, and many professionals advocated persistently for alternatives, but they never stuck. So here we are with our nice big inclusive bucket of dry eyes. So big it can hold an awful lot of people and an awful lot of different types of people. And of course, it also includes the original small box definition of dry eye under newer, fancier names to help distinguish it from other types of dry eye. We just need one more piece of information before we move on, which is that our dry eye bucket itself lives within a context, a bigger bucket called the Ocular Surface Disease bucket, and we will come back to that soon. So while science was studying tears and making this nice big dry eye bucket, industry was also responding to the challenge and working to produce drugs and devices and consumer products of all descriptions for all these people in the big bucket. It looked something like this. First, we've got self-care. In other words, over-the-counter drugs and consumer products that are used both by people that have been diagnosed and by people that haven't. Obviously, over-the-counter eye drops, of which now there are a great many, and these are just the lubricant types, not redness relievers and other OTC categories. And we've got nutritional supplements. That's all the dry eye branded omega-3s and so on. We've got lid care, an infinite selection of eyelid hygiene products and compresses. And we've got sundry other items, including things like moisture goggles and glasses and steam devices. Then we've got the medical care side. This is dominated by prescription drugs. We have 7 FDA-approved prescription drugs, probably another 2 coming this year, many more in the pipeline. We've got plugs. We've got a whole host of MGD in-office device treatments. We've got specialty contacts, including sclerals, and there's an entire industry around the sclerals alone, a good share of which is aimed at dry eye. And we've got sundry other things like amniotic membranes and autologous serum eye drop preparation services. Industry has not failed us. If anything, they've been a little overzealous. We have so much stuff for dry eye. We'll get into that in more detail in video number 3. Now we're all caught up to the present day on science and industry, so we're going to shift gears and talk about ocular surface disease, which was the big bucket that encompasses the dry eye bucket. It can take many years for changes in science to seep into medical practice. Education takes time, practice patterns evolve gradually. You're never going to have a time when every qualified, skilled doctor is singing from the same song sheet on dry eye, but that doesn't mean the average eye doctor will fail to provide appropriate medical care for dry eye patients. It also doesn't mean your doctor has to be a dry eye specialist to provide competent medical care for people like us. In clinical practice, there is a decently consistent model for what happens when people like us who fit somewhere in this big dry eye bucket show up in their offices. This is where ocular surface disease comes in. This big gray bucket, which contains dry eye by any definition, but also lots of other things, this bucket is my eye doctor's primary context for people who walk in with the types of symptoms we've talked about. The ocular surface disease bucket is basically anything potentially involving damage to the surfaces of the eye, meaning the cornea and conjunctiva. I have some examples in the bucket here. These are not exhaustive lists. So here I am seeing an eye doctor for an appointment, maybe for the first time, with these kinds of symptoms. We all know the drill. I explain my symptoms. The doctor examines my eyes, looking for clinical signs of anything going on the ocular surfaces, meaning, again, the cornea and conjunctiva. They're looking for anything that's a concern in its own right and anything that explains the symptoms I've described. They may perform supplemental tests. Those might be suggested by what they're seeing through the slit lamp, or they may be part of their standard protocol for ocular surface disease patients. In most cases, this is not a super high-tech process and doesn't need to be. There's a lot of fancy tools on the market for dry eye diagnosis, but a correct ocular surface disease diagnosis generally depends more on the doctor's experience and skills than specific technologies. Next, what does my diagnosis look like? Well, possibly one or more things in that long list of stuff on the ocular surface disease bucket. And they'll tell me if I should be concerned or not. Bear in mind, their assessment of my severity level is 100% based on what they see. Last, they come up with a treatment plan for me if they feel I need treatment, again, based on signs of ocular surface disease that they see. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but we do need to understand that my doctor's world revolves around this examination process. We don't get told we have dry eye because we feel dry. At least I hope not. We get told we have dry eye if we look dry, and we get told something else is wrong if they see something else wrong. And when our doctors talk about our severity level, they are speaking in clinical terms. Why aren't my symptoms part of the gray bucket? Don't they matter? After all, that's why I came to the doctor in the first place. Yes, they absolutely matter, and I'm going to start talking about that very shortly here. But my symptoms do not and cannot matter to my doctor the same way they do to me. The bucket contains what the doctor can verify through an examination and conventional testing. The problem with symptoms is they so often really and truly don't match what the doctor sees. There are people who look exactly like me but feel much worse or much better than I do. There are people whose eyes look terrible but they feel fine. And there are many more who look mostly fine and feel awful. So if I'm feeling really bad and my doctor says I've got a little mild dry eye, that doesn't mean they're heartless or ignorant or failing to listen. They're actually probably just following their training. My doctor's going to hang their hat on what they see in front of them through the slit lamp. So once again, the ocular surface disease perspective, the gray bucket, is the natural perspective for the eye doctor seeking to help dry eye patients. And their attempts to help us are becoming more and more problematic because there are so many patients showing up whose symptoms outstrip their clinical signs of disease. Now at last, it's time to talk about ocular surface pain and what that means. This time, we're going to unpack the patient experience in more detail. It typically all starts here. My eyes feel fill in the blank. They're bothering me so much, it's affecting my fill in the blank again. This might have started gradually, might have started suddenly, doesn't matter. I might think I know the root cause, I might not, doesn't matter. The commonality is, at some point, the extent to which this thing is bothering me and affecting my life reaches a threshold of tolerance where I say to myself, I have a real problem and I have to do something. So naturally, I go to the eye doctor, and the thing that prompts me to go is typically the functional impact of my symptoms, whatever that means for me. Maybe I can't concentrate at work because my eyes are so uncomfortable, or I can't drive as far as I need to anymore, or I can't read comfortably, or my day itself is coming to an end too soon because my eyes bother me so much, or I'm waking up in the middle of the night with eye pain. These functional constraints sooner or later motivate me to see a doctor. And the thing I would like the doctor to fix or improve is the sensations or symptoms themselves. If our eyes were comfortable and we weren't thinking about our eyes all the time and our eyes weren't interfering with our lives, I really don't think many of us would ever care at all in the abstract about our tear breakup time or lissamine grain staining or our meibography. Since I do have a problem, of course, I also would really like my doctor to find root causes, etc. Absolutely. But the first order of business is I have a practical problem that I want to solve. Next, we're going to take a closer look at the pink bucket, these things that we call symptoms. We each have our own personal collection of symptoms. We relate to some of the things in the bucket more than others, but there's something that most of these symptoms have in common. All of the ones here in the red print, and more that aren't on the list, can be classed under the heading of ocular discomfort. That's how they're often referred to in the medical literature. There are additional symptoms associated with dry eye, like fluctuating vision or eye redness. Those are the ones in gray. Plenty of people have one or more of those in addition to discomfort symptoms. And for some people, vision or redness are the only problem they're experiencing. But by and large, taken as a whole, the dry eye patient world is dominated by people who are uncomfortably aware of their eyes. So now we're just going to look at the red print ones. I want to talk about the language we use, and specifically the word discomfort and the word pain. The word pain has cultural associations that narrow down what we tend to apply it to. Many of us only use it for certain types of sensations or a certain severity level. Might be stabbing pain or burning pain or throbbing pain or headache pain or back pain. Like, I can't call it pain unless it feels a particular way or it's really, really bad. This is why I had eye pain listed as just one of the things on the list. People relate to eye pain as its own thing. Most of us would not naturally use the word pain about things like grittiness or itching or light sensitivity or general irritation or sore lids or a feeling of dryness. Using the word pain for those things might feel like we're overstating it. Instead, we tend to reserve the word pain for worst-case scenarios, like severe neuropathic pain. So I want to introduce a concept here. And if you've been following the Dry Eye Foundation for a while or participating in our Zoom groups, you're probably already well aware of this, but for others it will be new. All of these symptoms of discomfort are pain. Specifically, they're ocular surface pain symptoms. The International Association for the Study of Pain has a pretty straightforward definition of pain, and their definition stayed the same since, for the most part, since the 70s, and all of this stuff qualifies. Pain is a spectrum. Using the word pain does not imply that it's excruciating. It does not imply a certain type of sensation. It does not imply a cause or a source like neuropathic. Our eyes are designed with very dense nerve pack that can produce more sensation than almost any other part of the body. Our nervous system is programmed to make us associate eye pain with potential blindness. That helped us survive as a species, and all of that biological programming is why eye pain of any type or degree can be very high impact for us, physically and emotionally. So you may never have used the word pain to describe your eye symptoms, and that word may not resonate for you. But if you have these types of symptoms, you do have ocular surface pain. Now, I want to be really clear here that when I talk about ocular surface pain, I am not talking about neuropathic pain specifically. The phrase ocular surface pain does not imply a particular type or cause of pain. I'm also not talking about the infamous pain without stain. Some of us have plenty of staining, but with or without the stain, I've got the pain part. I'm talking about pain, period. How my eyes feel, without respect to why they feel that way or how they look or anything else. This is not about the pink bucket of symptoms being symptoms of another thing or not. It's just about the fact that I have this ocular surface pain. It matters. It deserves to be acknowledged and measured and addressed. All right, so now that we know everything in the pink bucket is a form of pain, we really need to talk about the word chronic again, as it relates to ocular surface pain specifically. Now, if you watched my first video in this series, you know I have pretty strong feelings about the use of the word chronic in the dry eye world and the psychological harm that it continues to cause. So we're going to go back to the International Association for the Study of Pain, who gave us that really helpful definition of pain. And this time our question is, what does chronic pain mean? And the answer is, if the pain persists or recurs for more than 3 months, it's chronic pain. This is mind-blowing. It ought to be incredibly liberating. The word chronic, with reference to pain, including ocular surface pain, this word chronic is not a reference to the future at all. It's a reference to the past, to how long this thing has gone on up to now. So chronic doesn't mean I'm cursed. Chronic doesn't mean it will be like this forever. Pause, slow down. The phrase chronic pain is just describing what already happened. The word chronic is painfully misunderstood and misused in the dry eye community because we think in dry eye terms, not ocular surface pain terms, even though for many of us our most important problem in a pragmatic sense revolves around ocular surface pain. You see what a difference one word makes, that little pain word? When we shift our thinking from dryness to pain as a framework for thinking, we get to tap into a completely different world of possibilities. We're going to get into that more in video number 3. So to wrap up about the bucket full of eye symptoms, the pink bucket is ocular surface pain. And if we've been experiencing things in this pink bucket in a troubling degree for 3 months or more, it's chronic ocular surface pain. And just as ocular surface disease is the natural perspective of our eye doctors, chronic ocular surface pain is the natural perspective for the majority of us dry eye patients seeking help. And now it's time to put everything we've talked about together. We started with people experiencing uncomfortable eyes and how the definition of dry eye was expanded from a small box to a large bucket to accommodate them. And we've talked about ocular surface disease as the primary paradigm or perspective for our eye doctors. And we've talked about ocular surface pain as the primary perspective for us patients. And the simplest way to think about what I'm describing here is I'm busting apart 2 halves of dry eye, which honestly never really fit together in the first place. And we've moved the medical half into the disease bucket and the pain half into the pain bucket. Now, I've been using buckets to represent these 2 things, but they take up too much space. So from here on out, I'm going to switch to these little eyeballs instead, ocular surface disease and ocular surface pain. And next, we're going to line them up and compare how they fit into our eye care experience. In the context of my appointment with my eye doctor, first of all, who's the expert for each of these 2 things? In other words, who decides what's wrong and how bad it is and whether we need to do something about it? In ocular surface disease, the expert is my doctor. No matter how smart I think I am not my doctor. The measuring sticks are several well-established clinical signs and tests of my doctor's choosing. Speaking for myself personally, while I may ask many questions during an appointment, I'm not going to attempt to micromanage or judge my doctor's diagnostic process. Honestly, if I can't trust them to do it well, why am I there? Moving to ocular surface pain, the expert is me. When it comes to how my eyes feel, my reality is the only reality. My eye doctor cannot tell me how much burning or grittiness or irritation or light sensitivity I should or should not have. They can tell me whether they can detect the causes or they have a possible explanation for my pain, but that's not the same. My pain, my reality. And it is absolutely okay for my assessment of my ocular surface pain to be very different, and yes, worse than my doctor's assessment of my ocular surface disease. That doesn't mean my doctor's misdiagnosed me or not taking me seriously enough. It just means these two things really and truly are different. Now, when it comes to measuring sticks, while there are many dry eye symptom surveys available and some of them are scientifically validated, there is no ocular surface pain scale that can effectively interpret our community's experiences and meet our community's needs, not by a long shot. I believe this to be the most significant gap in dry eye disease research today, because you can't fix things that you can't measure. How will you know if a treatment is effective when you can't measure the results in terms that are meaningful to patients? That's a really big topic for another day, and I will touch on it again briefly in videos number 3 on treatments and number 5 on treatment efficacy. In the meantime, I would just say any measuring stick is better than none. Try them out, see what resonates. If something feels like it explains your experience of your ocular surface pain adequately, go ahead and use it. I'll show you some examples. The pain scale might actually be the best choice here. There's many versions of these, and while they're not tailored specifically for the eyes, what some of them are really good at is measuring how much this experience is dominating our thoughts and interfering with our lives. My only caveat on the pain scale is you'll either have to get used to relating to the word pain in an eye context, or you can just substitute your most bothersome symptom words for the word pain. In terms of dry eye specific surveys, the best known by far is the Ocular Surface Disease Index. I've recommended that tons over the years. It's been around almost 30 years. There are additional validated dry eye questionnaires like SPEED, and there's also an ocular pain one called OPAS. I encourage you to just find what works for you. I want to show you an illustration now of how different ocular surface disease and ocular surface pain can be for a given individual, and how the differences in perspective lead to communication challenges. So we start with a grid. Imagine using this little grid to chart how severe your dry eye is. We've got an x-axis, and it is ocular surface disease, my doctor's world. The further I move to the right in the grid, the worse my eyes look to my doctor, and that determines how concerned and how engaged my doctor will be from the standpoint of risk to my eye health and my sight and the urgency of doing something. The y-axis is ocular surface pain, my world. The further up I go vertically on the grid, the worse I feel and the more urgency I feel about doing something about it. I'm going to give some examples now of where people might live on this grid. And when I put a dot on the grid, the black number will be ocular surface disease and the red number will be pain. We'll start with a couple of extremes. So here's somebody who scores an 8 on disease and a 1 on pain. They don't feel bad at all, but they look terrible, and their doctor's really worried about the risk to their sight. This is somebody with seriously compromised nerve function who should be feeling lots of pain, but they can't. How about the opposite extreme? This person's scoring a 0 on ocular surface disease and an 8 on ocular surface pain. They feel horrific, but they look great. That's somebody with crippling neuropathic pain, but no dry eye or anything else. Now I'm going to add a little diagonal line to represent people whose ocular surface disease has the same severity level as their ocular surface pain. So, for example, here is a Stevens-Johnson syndrome patient in bad shape. Lots of disease, lots of pain. And here's a couple more people who are on or near the line where their disease and their symptoms, which we now call pain, are tracking well together. So that's the general idea, and now here's some more examples. In this illustration, anybody who's, say, a 4 or higher on the y-axis has a red number of 4 or higher. These people are seriously uncomfortable. They're probably looking for relief for ocular surface pain, and their disease treatment may or may not be delivering that relief. if they're on or near the diagonal line, their doctor has a similar level of concern about treating them because of how much disease is going on. But what about the people whose red number is a lot bigger than their black number? There's an awful lot of people like that who have been diagnosed with, say, dry eye or MGD, who've got tons of ocular surface pain, but most of the doctors they see, and yes, they usually see many, don't feel that they have a problem that needs a lot of urgent treatment. These are the people who are most likely to feel not understood by their eye doctor or have difficulty communicating about their problem, and especially they're probably frustrated with treatments that don't work. Suppose I'm the person scoring 2 on ocular surface disease and 5 on ocular surface pain. And my doctor's thinking, not much to see here, cornea's clear, no real risks, I don't see any significant threat to eye health. And they tell me, you actually look pretty good. I mean, I'm seeing a little mild dry eye, a little blepharitis, nothing to be really concerned about, so here's what to do, and I'll see you in 6 months or a year. But from my perspective, if I walked in the door struggling with persistent symptoms and a lot of practical life impact, my doctor's seeming unconcern may actually be really confusing and stressful to me because I don't understand the disparity. Doctor thinks they're delivering good news by saying, hey, this is mild. But my experience of ocular surface pain is anything but mild. I don't know how to interpret what they're saying to me. Is my doctor missing something? Do I need a different kind of specialist? Or, oh my God, is it just me? Is there something wrong with me? Am I just not coping well? That's a stressful appointment setup. But it wouldn't be if I knew the difference between ocular surface disease and ocular surface pain, and if my doctor knew how to communicate more effectively with me. Here's a quick example of how communication can go off the rails from the very beginning for a new dry eye patient. I go to the doctor and I say, my eyes feel irritated, scratchy, gritty. My doctor says, you've got dry eye, and gives me something to do about it. Now, I've been taught that my symptoms are dryness. So sometime later, I go back to the doctor, or maybe a different doctor, and my symptoms are worse. And I say, my eyes are so dry, because that's how I learned to communicate my symptoms. My doctor looks at my eyes and doesn't see much of any dryness, maybe a little bit of something, maybe gives me some drops and some advice. And I leave confused and worried. Imagine if we could redo those conversations in the language of ocular surface disease, which is mild in this case, and ocular surface pain, which is not. So all of that was about communication gaps around the severity of my diagnosis. What about treatment? What does the ocular surface disease and ocular surface pain paradigm mean for treatment? I'm going to be covering this in more detail in video number 3, but for today's purposes, what I want to do is encourage you to think about the implications for treatment goals. What is it we're trying to accomplish? In ocular surface disease, where remember, the doctor's the expert on how bad it is and how much it matters, the doctor's top goals are to identify and treat ocular surface disease in order to restore, preserve, and protect vision and tissue. When an eye doctor prescribes a drug or recommends a treatment, it's usually going to relate to these goals. In ocular surface pain, where remember, I'm the expert on how bad it is and how much it matters, my goals are to relieve ocular surface pain, to feel better, in order to restore and improve functional vision and quality of life. When I say functional vision, I'm talking about specific activities like computer use or driving or work-related visually intensive tasks, and the specific limitations my eye symptoms, my ocular surface pain, can impose even when my visual acuity is excellent. These two sets of goals are not in conflict. They work in parallel. Some of us have more ocular surface disease than others, and our doctors need to be more involved. Most of us have ocular surface pain. Treatments for ocular surface disease may or may not give us enough relief for ocular surface pain. And when they don't, we have to explore other avenues. Or when we don't have enough ocular surface disease in the first place to treat, we also have to seek other avenues. The good news is there's so many things we can do, and that's what video number 3 is partly about. All right, we've covered the concepts of ocular surface disease and ocular surface pain, and I'll get into the practical application plenty more during this video series. I need to wrap things up for today, but I just want to leave you with a little summary and some big picture thoughts. People diagnosed with dry eye disease normally have a dual problem: ocular surface disease, ocular surface pain. Often these problems occur in unequal degrees. Often we don't get enough relief for ocular surface pain. And when our ocular surface pain is more severe than our ocular surface disease, it complicates our medical care in many ways. We need to call these things by their names. Dry eye is not an accurate description of what most of us experience. Ocular surface disease gives doctors and patients a clearer pathway to detailed diagnosis and clearer communication. Ocular surface pain unites and dignifies the symptoms that we struggle with most and that often constitute the primary reason we sought medical care in the first place. We also need to give ocular surface pain equal status. The pathway to better patient outcomes has got to involve prioritizing ocular surface pain as its own endeavor in research and in industry and in clinical care. That's a very large long-term goal, and here at the Dry Eye Foundation we are 100% committed to promoting and working towards that goal in every way possible, and we are actively seeking allies and partners. Meantime, in the right here and now for us patients, it's my belief that the concept of ocular surface pain brings better hope. It can provide a framework to advocate for ourselves more effectively. It opens doors to additional approaches for us to get better outcomes and better quality of life, which is what this is all about. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to get in touch, please go to dryeyefoundation.org and use the contact form, or call us at 800-484-0244.